listeners, how's it going? Lloyd Carter here from Wing Magma. Welcome to episode 12 of the Wing Magma podcast, where we talk about all things Wing Magma and also the Wednesday Wang playlist that I'm curating over on Spotify. If you are a fan of this type of thing, or if you know anybody that might be a fan of this type of thing, please spread the word. Come and follow me on YouTube at Wing Magma, Instagram at Wing Magma, and have a search on Spotify for the Wednesday Wang playlist and the Wing Magma podcast. So anyone that tuned in last week, you would have heard the first part of me talking through my 50 of my favorite albums. To say that they're the top 50, I'd probably have to put more thought into if I was going to say these I think are the 50 top albums, but these are 50 albums that have influenced my music taste. They've had some sort of significant impact on my life in one way or another, or I just think that they're bangers. So I'm going to dive straight back into that and move over to my other screen, which is over here. So the first track that I'm going to talk about today is comes from the album Rage Against the Machine by Rage Against the Machine. I was trying to think, like, this is one of those albums that a lot of my friends are into. I mean, but I can't pinpoint when I got into it. I wasn't into it at the time that it came out, and I certainly wasn't into it at the same time that I was discovering other music from that time. I don't remember when this became an important album for me, but it just kind of, it drifted. Perhaps it was just the tracks. I knew like the big hits, and then like Know Your Enemy, which is this track, Killing in the Name, Bomb track, you know, like these. There's so many great tracks on this album, and this was probably around 2004, 2005. I remember really listening to it a lot and just took a lot of influence from Tom Morello's guitar playing. Later found out that it was recorded at Sound City, so it was one of those Sound City albums, and it's an absolute banger. Recently, well, I say recently, it would have been a few years ago now, my cousin Edward, or Ted Melton, sometimes he listens to this, so shout outs to Ted if he is listening. I remember introducing him to Rage Against the Machine, and I think I showed him Bulls on Parade, and he would have been 15, 16 at the time, and he'd never heard them, and it was just such a treat to be able to kind of share a band the caliber of Rage Against the Machine with somebody new, a new generation of fan, and you know, and it was a treasure trove of tracks for him to enjoy, and you know, hopefully he did, but I'm sure he did. They're fantastic tracks, they're a fantastic band. So track number one, well, the first track that I'm talking about today, track 14 on the playlist, is Know Your Enemy from Rage Against the Machine. The album Rage Against the Machine and the band Rage Against the Machine. Know Your Enemy. Okay, cool. So the next track on the playlist today is Closer from Kings of Leon from the album Only by the Night. So I was umming whether to include this because I don't think I'm going to get many cool points for including this album. However, at the time that this came out, like, I was really into Because of the Times when it came out, and when this album, so that was the album previous to this, and when this album came out, this was kind of like their breakthrough album. So like Sex on Fire is on this album and lots of their big hits. I feel like this is when they went from being that band with the big mustaches and silly hair, kind of from the mid-noughties, to something quite important. But like I said, this is an album that lived in my car. The songwriting on this album and the layering they're very simple. They're very simple songs, but they're just well layered. They're all built on rhythms and textures and incredible vocals. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of this album. wouldn't go as far as to say I'm a huge Kings of Leon fan. I've not really enjoyed so much of what they've done since this album, but definitely because of the times and of Youth and Young Man. That was their first album. I can't remember what album The Bucket is on, but that, you know, they've done some good stuff. And at the time when they first came out, I just remember thinking they were a bit of a novelty band. Didn't really take them particularly seriously until because of the times, and then Only by the Night. So this is the opening track from Only by the Night, and it is called Closer by Kings of Leon. Closer by Kings of Leon. So next track on the playlist, Buffalo from Gaz Coombs' second album, Matador. I was always a big Supergrass fan. Well, I was a fan of the first 2 or 3 albums. Kind of lost track of them after that. And this isn't his first album. I can't remember what the first album's called, but I remember going back and listening to it after I heard Matador, and I wasn't too hot on it. But Matador is an incredible album. Gaz Coombs' songwriting is incredible. The production is amazing. Again, there's lots of layers and textures here, but his singing is just something else. Like, he's got such character in his voice, and there's a freedom you can feel on this album. And again, I think I mentioned it on the previous podcast that this album came out relatively late on in my kind of life, but like as I got older, and to get into an album like this as I'm getting older is kind of reaffirming for me that I can still like and enjoy new music when it comes out. It doesn't have to have lived with me for all these years for it to be credible in my eyes. But yeah, if I don't know how popular this album is, but if it's not one that people have checked out, I strongly recommend it. It's got, you know, kind of Tom York vibes over it, but it's all about Gaz Coombs' voice and some incredibly beautiful songs that he's written on this album. So the first track on the album is called Buffalo. The album is Matador, and it is by Gaz Coombs. Cool, so that was Buffalo by Gaz Coombs. Next album on the playlist is This It by The Strokes. This was a bit of a game changer for me, this album. It was probably the first time a band really kind of not just influenced the music that I was listening to, but the clothes that I wore. There was just, considering how simple the songs are, it was completely new at the time. I can't it's difficult to, like, I think perhaps indie was drying up at that point, and then something so cool and so fresh coming out of nowhere. The songs are incredibly catchy, like the catchiest pop songs you'll ever hear, but they don't particularly sound like anybody else. I mean, like, I remember reading that they were from New York, and they were that CBGB's kind of new wave vibe and all this kind of stuff, but I went out and listened to bands like Television off the back of that, and early Blondie stuff, and it was just, there's nothing like what the Strokes were doing, and it's all just kind of layers of simple guitar lines, simple vocal lines, simple drum beats that all kind of amalgamate into something quite complex. When you really deconstruct their songs, there's a lot going on, but it just sounds really by the numbers in places. But it's just incredible songwriting, incredible melodies, fantastic imagery in the lyrics. But it was just, I can't think of many other albums that have really defined an era purely based on the music. and like I say, for it to go beyond just the music, but like I remember there being a wave of the bands off the back of the Strokes, and again, like I don't think I ever wore a pair of Converse trainers before I knew the Strokes. They've got a lot to answer for. But yeah, fantastic band, fantastic album. And again, this album lived in my car, like the first car that I ever had. I had a mini disc player in my car, and I had this album and the next album that I'm going to discuss on the same mini disc, and it was just in heavy rotation on long car journeys, you know, so it's one of those albums for me. New York City Cops by the Strokes from Is This It? New York City Cops by the Strokes, and so like I said, I had that album on a mini disc, and also on that mini disc was Revolver by the Beatles. So it was around the time that I started driving that I really got into the Beatles. Martin and I both kind of explored them at the same time. I would have said that Martin was into them more before me, possibly on the back of, because like I say, Martin was quite into Oasis when we were teenagers, and I think, you know, as we started to kind of explore Oasis, bands such as the Beatles, Rolling Stones, and, you know, other bands from the 60s, kind of, we found them on that kind of journey. And I remember getting into Sgt. Pepper because that was always, no matter what list of best albums you read, Sgt. Pepper was either at the top or incredibly high. So as much as I enjoy Sgt. Pepper's, Revolver, like I say, really lived with me in my car for a long time, and I just really got into Paul McCartney's songs off the back of Revolver. I think the first 3 tracks, possibly even 4 tracks, no, it's the first 3 tracks. You've got Taxman, which is a George Harrison song, then you've got Eleanor Rigby, which is Paul McCartney's song, and then you've got I'm Only Sleeping, which is a John song. So you start to get a sense of their varied songwriting capabilities, and it. But yeah, it was like I was always more into Paul's songs, and there are some fantastic Paul McCartney songs on here. However, I've chosen, saying that, I think I've chosen a John Lennon song. So And Your Bird Can Sing has got an incredible guitar line, incredible melodies, and I remember hearing the story that John Lennon has had no recollection of writing this song. It just appeared, listen back to it, and he's got had no memory of doing it, which, if you can just knock songs out like this without even being aware of the process, that's just something else. So yeah, great song, great album, Revolver by the Beatles, and the track is And Your Bird Can Sing. And Your Bird Can Sing by the Beatles. So another band which I don't think, I was huge into the Manic Street Preachers when I was a teenager. They really kind of spoke to me and what I felt I was experiencing at that time. They really resonated with me. I say they've not aged well. It's more my taste has changed. I mean, like, I think the last album that I really listened to of theirs was Know Your Enemy, which was, can't remember when that came out, 2001, 2002, but I just started to get into other things and they stopped being my band. But the Holy Bible was a huge influence for me. There was some incredibly dark lyrics, like the darkest lyrics you can think of. I mean, what Richie Edwards was going through at that time is, you know, there's no one's sure if he killed himself or if he just went missing and he's managed to stay missing, but equally the guy was at the end of his tether, and that comes out in his art at the time. And This Is Yesterday is just such a beautiful song, and I haven't really listened to it for a long time, and like just kind of going through my favourite albums, that was always my favourite Manic Street Preachers song, and there was a version of it that I had a VHS of theirs where they played a concert in Manchester, and James Dean Bradfield played This Is Yesterday on an acoustic guitar, and that was the first time I heard it, and it was just like, wow, that's a great song. James Dean Bradfield is an incredible vocalist and songwriter, and to be able to take somebody else's lyrics and just create something as beautiful as he did with some of those songs, you know, I think is a completely different type of skill set for a songwriter. And there's a feeling, there's a vibe in the lyrics, and of kind of letting go with This Is Yesterday. You know, like you've had all of this struggle and all of these problems, and it's not that you're giving up, so to speak. It feels like you're just drifting away from things. Great song, and like I say, it's the Manic Street Preachers were always niche in their audience, I think. So this one might not be for everyone, but for those that know, you know. So The Holy Bible is the album. This Is Yesterday by Manic Street Preachers. This Is Yesterday by the Manic Street Preachers. So the next track on the playlist is Lemmy by Supergrass. Aisha Coco was an album that I was really into. I remember listening to it a lot when I was doing my GCSEs. It wasn't that I got into it at that time. I just remember it being on a lot whilst I was revising and stuff like that. And I just really got into the energy of that album, the energy of the band, the kind of melody in their kind of... I think they were certainly a different definition of pop punk. They were punk in their kind of roots, their foundations, and certainly their energy, but they wrote out pop songs. So like, I know that they are not what you would consider to be pop punk, but like I say, there's some great songwriting there, and incredible harmonies and incredible bass lines, which, like I say, I go back to, and it's just like, wow, those three guys work so hard together. And like I said, as I said on when I was talking about Gaz Coombs' solo album, his vocals are just incredible on this album. Even then, you know, even on his first album, that, you know, he had it back then. So Aisha Coco is the album, Lenny is the song, the band Supergrass. Enjoy. Lenny by Supergrass. Okay, so the next track is from Death From Above. The album Outrage is Now, and the track is Nomad. So another one of these albums that have cropped up later on in my musical taste that I just dig so hard. Like this album, like I really liked what's the album? You're a Woman, I'm a Machine. I really liked that, and the song Romantic Rights was really exciting for me when it first came out. The idea of just two guys, I think, like, yeah, White Stripes were very popular at that time, but like just bass and drums, just two guys kind of just write music together. That setup was quite appealing, and me and Martin went on to do not our version of that. I remember, right, so me and Martin used to argue about this because he wanted to go a lightning bolt kind of way, and I always wanted to take it a Death From Above kind of way when we were doing C-Rag. I think Martin won that argument, and then ultimately C-Rag became its own thing. Ish. It was more of a lightning bolt thing than it was anything else. Lots of fun, and something that I really hope we get to do some more. But like I say, my kind of inspiration for that would have been Death From Above. But then obviously they split up for a long time, and then they came back. They made another album, and I can't remember what what it's called off the top of my head. But so this was the second album from when they came back, and again, like, it just feels like they're back in. They not got back in their groove. They found a whole new groove to work in. I think I saw a documentary on them about like how they came back together and what led to them splitting. And it's, you know, there was a lot of tensions going on between them. I think there was a lot of alcoholism involved and just struggling with being in a band. They disbanded. They went on and had their own kind of lives, and then they came back together, which is, I don't know, inspiring in terms of what we're trying to do now in Bronze Age. You know, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be a certain type of thing back then. We disbanded it, and now we're kind of regrouping, having had 11 years of life experience. You know, what's going to happen now? We're not the same people we were back then, but hopefully, you know, there's learnings and experience that we can all bring to what we do, and it's got the potential to be something better and stronger as a result, as this album. But like I said, it's just full of absolute bangers, and I really, just this first song on the album, it's just, it gives me power, it nourishes me. So the album, Outrage Is Now, the song Nomad, the band Death From Above, 1970. This is right, okay, so Spotify calls them Death From Above 1979. I always knew them as that, but I swear they dropped the 1979 for this album. I don't know, I can't keep up. Death From Above, DFA, 1979. Nomad from Death From Above 1979 from Outrage Is Now. So I think I've spoken on recent podcasts about this next album, Crimes by Blood Brothers. Really influential album on my musical taste around 2004, 2005, and subsequently what we ended up doing in public relations exercise around 2006, 2007. Incredible album, and like I say, it took me a while to kind of penetrate with this album because the vocals are just somewhere else. Certainly Johnny Whitney's kind of higher pitched vocals. Once I got on board with that, I was all in with this album and with this band. And I can't remember what the track was, Live at the Apocalypse Cabaret, that I shared a few weeks ago, but this is the title track from the album. For anybody that wasn't into it then, I really think that this is a good album and worth checking out, but I will not hold it against you if you can't get past the vocals. But if you do, there are treats in this album, and like I said, there's lots of different vocal textures, there's lots of styles that they use, but ultimately I understand why it's not for everyone, but I can't tell you how much I loved this album at the time. Everything about it just brings back very, very fond memories of that period. So Crimes by the Blood Brothers, check it out. Crimes by the Blood Brothers. So the next album was a huge game changer for me. So Relationship of Command by At the Drive-In. Very much more so than the Blood Brothers. At the Drive-In had an incredible influence over my musical taste, my guitar playing, the music that I wrote for public relations exercise, the way that I express myself in public relations exercise, not just from a songwriting capacity, but from a performance capacity, was heavily influenced by At the Drive-In. I mean, like, I used to watch videos of those guys, and they were so free on stage, and it was just so much passion, so much energy, and it's just like, I need that in my life. Certainly at the time, you know, when I was early 20s, you know, wanted music to be my thing, and I wanted to pour as much into it as I can, and I wanted to be able to just pour everything that I had into every performance that we had. And it was bands like At the Drive-In that helped me realise that. Omar Rodriguez's guitar playing. Omar is up there with my kind of top 3 guys in terms of guitar players. So Omar, Johnny Greenwood, and John Frusciante. I'd love to be able to say that I was a mixture of all of those 3. I'm nowhere near any of those guys, but I certainly draw influence from those guys still, and the textures, the colours, the layers of guitar tracks that were built on this album are just phenomenal. But yeah, I think at the time I would have been listening to a lot of indie. Radiohead were very much my favourite band, and then it was Ian from Tie-Dye Re that literally gave me this album when it, like, we were, I think I've mentioned the story before, but like we were on a coach trip at our college. We were studying music technology, and we went to some kind of audio equipment fair or exhibition, in Birmingham, and Ian had this album on his CD player, like his Sony Discman or whatever it was, and he gave me the headphones, and I listened to it on the way back, and it was just like, oh my god, this is incredible. And those guys at the time, they were influenced by At the Drive, and they then went on to be further influenced by other bands. I think Walls of Greece is the band that Neil mentioned that they were heavily into, but like, again, I used to go see those guys play, guys my age, playing in venues in my city, just being able to throw themselves around the stage, still play, it wasn't just all about that, but it was just the energy that you pour into a set and you're playing is infectious. When you're watching that and you're watching people give so much to their performance, you can't help but be inspired. Well, I certainly can't. And I haven't seen footage of those guys playing for a long time, but like, if anybody's bored and on YouTube, if you search for At the Drive-In on Jules Holland playing One Arm Scissor, it's like, oh my god, like that is, it's probably too far the other way in terms of passion over playing, but like, just love it, absolutely love it. So yeah, a very, very influential album for me, like one of the most influential albums that I've ever listened to. So Relationship of Command, the track is Arc Arsenal by At the Drive-In. Enjoy. Arc Arsenal by At the Drive-In. So the next track, a bit of a genre change. I wouldn't have said I was a huge hip hop fan. I was definitely into it for a little while. And 2001 from Dr. Dre was an album that I enjoyed incredibly at the time when it came out. So I think it was 1999 when it came out. And there was a lot of artists all associated with Dr. Dre, like Eminem, Exhibit. There was quite a collective that were all kind of releasing albums. D12. Can't remember many more than that, but like there was a wealth of kind of content coming out from these people, and Dre 2001 was kind of like the high watermark for me in terms of production, in terms of just the quality of the tracks. But I still get a lot of joy from The Watcher. So The Watcher is the track that I've chosen. It's the opening track on the album. But there's what I used to really enjoy about hip hop, other than just like the music and the production. It was the stories that they would tell, and also like the kind of, sometimes it's like a cinematic experience listening to a well-produced hip-hop track. There's lots of sound effects, there's lots of peripheral sounds and sound effects and conversations going on, and you really get taken to other places. And I think this track is a particularly good example of, certainly of the production. I mean, this album lived in cars, so a lot of my friends at the time that were learning to drive, Dre 2001 would be the album that we'd listen to when we were driving around and stuff like that. So a lot of fond memories of this album, and it's been a lot of fun returning to it. It hasn't always been on Spotify, so I'm glad that it's on there. It might not be on there for much longer, I don't know, but it is at the moment. So The Watcher by Dr. Dre from 2001. The Watcher by Dr. Dre, I hope you enjoyed that. So this album, Refused, The Shape of Punk to Come. I've got a feeling that Tiernan must have introduced these guys to me, but somebody else needs to take credit for that. Apologies, I'm sure it was Tiernan. Frank Turner was very much into Refused, and I don't know if that's how Tiernan kind of got switched onto them, or if he just knew about them anyway. But this album appeared on my iPod at the time, and I just remember when this would have been in the first house that I lived in when I moved out from like my family home. So when I lived with Jay Marlowe, I remember listening to this album a lot, and it certainly went a certain amount to influence some of the music I was writing in PRE. There's a complexity here that I just never really, I don't feel that we reached or met or anything like that, but there's some great tracks on this album. It's a very complex, in terms of the rhythm structures and the riffs, the power behind them, but then also the kind of political kind of sentiment in the lyrics. There's a lot to unpick, but The Deadly Rhythm is just one of those tracks that it just gets me every single time. Like, no matter where I am when I'm listening to this, it's just such an incredibly well written post-punk track. It's so hardcore, it's so aggressive, so clever, so well constructed as well. I mean, like, just the way the tensions build and then drop and move from one thing to another. Again, like, if this isn't your bag, I get it, because it's intense, it's hardcore, it's screaming and it's heavy, but like, man, it's like I say, it switches, a switch gets switched on every time I hear it, every single time I hear it. It's a fantastic track. The Deadly Rhythm by Refused from The Shape of Punk to Come. The Deadly Rhythm by Refused. Alright, so next track. So obviously Michael Jackson is a divisive figure. I don't really want to get into the debate about Michael Jackson himself. This album was, my parents had this when I was a kid, and this was in the house growing up. I remember being frightened by the track Thriller, but not just the track Thriller. I mean, I would have been Charlie's age, so like 4 when my memories of this album started. But as soon as you put the track on Wanna Be Starting Something, there is a tension, and it, like, the first side of that album ends with Thriller, and it's just that experience of going through those tracks and just knowing what's coming. And then Thriller just used to scare the wits out of me, but I still used to listen to it anyway. But yeah, probably my earliest memory of being frightened is the track Thriller. But Want to Be Starting Something, so like it was definitely on an iPod that I had Bad and Thriller, and you know, Bad was another one of those albums that I grew up with as a child, but I've chosen Want to Be Starting Something because I think Thriller is an incredible album, and Want to Be Starting Something is an incredible song, and I've been listening to it recently, you know, like as part of this playlist. It's just one idea that goes round, and it's just that, and it loops and it builds, and layers come in and drop out and parts change, but it's all built on that rhythm and that bass hook. And I love songs like that. I love songs that build on very, very simple ideas. You know, it's something that I'd love to do in Bronze Age. You know, let's just build layers around a very simple idea. But it's also, I've always felt like this song is written back to front. Like, it kind of starts with the chorus, then it goes into the bridge, and then you've got the verse, and it's just kind of, and then it goes back to like the chorus, the bridge, the verse, and then, you know, bit like, I don't know, it works. I mean, like, I'm not judging it or critiquing it in that way, but it's disjointed, but it works perfectly. But like, each of those sections are in the wrong place, and even to make those sections work in the wrong place is incredible, I think. You know, like I say, people have very strong opinions one way or another about Michael Jackson, and I'm not here to debate the debate. Don't hold it against me for liking this track, and I won't hold it against you for skipping the track. Let's just remain friends. All right, so Want to Be Starting Something, Michael Jackson from Thriller. Want to Be Starting Something from Thriller. All right, so next track is Living Loving Maid, She's Just a Woman from Led Zeppelin 2. So Led Zeppelin 2 is a really important album for me because it was one of, is it the only album that I stole from my dad? Like, there's a few bands that my dad was into when I was growing up that kind of helped shape my opinion on a few things. I remember I really enjoyed listening to Slade, like with my dad. My dad used to be a market trader, and he had a van, and there was a few tapes that he had in his van. Led Zeppelin 2 was one of them. Slade Alive was another. Journey to the Center of the Earth was another one. And again, like on these long van journeys, he would put this stuff on, and I would just get lost in these things. And then when I spoke to my dad about it later on, he kind of told me about all of these bands that he used to like, kind of like Uriah Heep and Yes, and it's like my dad was into math rock, and it was like, oh Dad, we are similar in certain ways. But Led Zeppelin 2, my dad used to play that album to me, and I remember him saying, like, if you can ever play guitar like this, I would be a guitar player in his eyes. And he was referring to the solo in Whole Lot of Love. I don't think I've ever gone to the effort of learning. I'm not sure if I'd be able to play it or not, but like, I'll never have the respect of my father until I can play that, and I'm kind of okay with that. But yeah, I picked this track. I think it was my dad, we were talking about this album a few weeks ago, and he was saying, like, which album is Living Loving Maid on? And it was like Led Zeppelin 2, and that was one of his favourite tracks. So bit of a nod to my dad, this track. But yeah, fantastic album. I hope you enjoy the track. Living Loving Maid from Led Zeppelin 2. Okay, so next album on my playlist is A Song to Ruin from Million Dead. And the track is I Am the Party. So I've chosen this track because I remember listening. The first time I heard "I Am the Party" was I saw the video for it on MTV2. Very late at night, this video came on, and I remember thinking, "Who are these guys?" And like and there was a lot going on there, and I wasn't into it the first time round. And I remember thinking, like, I can't imagine this taking off. And that's not to say that I don't think Million Dead ever really did take off, but you know, Frank Turner certainly took off. You know, so like, props to the guy. Million Dead were a band that, you know, they were. I don't want to refer to them as our peers in public relations exercise, because they weren't. They were kind of a few years ahead of us. However, Tiernan befriended Frank Turner and became really close with Frank, and you know, they're good friends now. And I just remember really being excited about a band that we knew that were kind of becoming famous. You know, they had this album coming out and they were touring it, they were getting ready for the second album. You know, Frank Turner he's a really interesting guy, and he stayed around my house one night and we got talking about all sorts of stories that he, you know, of what he was getting up to. He was telling me this story about how Million Dead played in front of a few people in America to see if they were going to get signed to, I think it was Universal Records. And in that audience were Rick Rubin and Tom Morello, the owner of Universal, or who, you know, the A&R person or whatever. But they kind of played a show to those guys. I was like, oh my God, how cool is that? Even just to have the opportunity to play in front of those guys. Incredible. But yeah, so this album, like, it's a good one to listen to. I think there are probably 4 or 5 really, really, really strong tracks on here. And the way Frank Turner can smash about 2,000 words into a verse and still find an incredible melody and hook is an absolute art. So if people don't know Million Dead, certainly worth checking them out. Like I say, I think Frank stayed committed to his dream, and look at him now. I remember one time just watching him open the Olympic Games. I was like, oh my God, like, we shared a van with that guy, and now he is opening the Olympic Games. It's like, oh my God, it's incredible, absolutely incredible. But yeah, it all started with Million Dead. Well, there was a few other bands that he was in before then, but my kind of association with him started with Million Dead and A Song to Ruin. It's a banger of an album. Not sure how many people are into them, so like, if they're new to you, let me know. But yeah, hope you enjoy. I Am the Party by Million Dead, from A Song to Ruin. So the last track that I'm going to talk to on this episode of the podcast is Shiva by Coldplay from the album Parachutes. Now again, Coldplay are a divisive band. This album really grew on me, and at the time I didn't want to like it because it kind of represented indie going in a place that I didn't really want it to go. Like, after the kind of highs of, you know, Nebworth and Oasis and all that kind of stuff, it felt like indie just got really melancholic and sad, you know, like, and upset. You know, there was bands like Embrace and The Verve, and they're all kind of built on ballads and low tempo, grey, miserable songs. and I kind of start to fall out of love with indie music as a result of it. Now Coldplay, I don't think were bucking that trend. I just kind of my preconceptions as to what indie should be and what this wasn't kind of started to fade away as I got into other things, but this album just kind of stuck with me. And it is a fantastic album. The songs on it are so incredible, and it's really, really well recorded. Like, just listening to it recently, like Shiva, I think Shiva was a really early single, and I think, again, like, props to Martin. I'm pretty sure Martin went to see them at the Charlotte, and he was talking about this band. But there's some really great guitar, there's some really intricate guitar playing on it, but like, just, there's a rim tap, and it's just, this rim tap just sounds incredible. And like, I always think about it when I hear it. It's just like, that is just like the perfect recording of a rim tap on the drums. It's just like simple things, I guess, but like I've really enjoyed listening to this song. I probably should get stuck into the album again. It's an incredibly warm album, and some great songs on there. But again, I understand that people, not everybody, like, they kind of became the new U2. But, you know, am I a Coldplay fan? I'm certainly a fan of some of their stuff. This album, for me, is one of my favourites. So yeah, maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, and if you like Coldplay and you haven't heard Shiva for a while, you're in for a treat, because, like I say, it still holds up in my opinion. So Shiva by Coldplay from the album Parachutes. Cool, I'm going to call it a day for now, and I've still got 20 odd tracks to go through, so I'll try and wrap that up in part 3 of the top 50 Wing Magma albums playlist. Like I say, you can find this playlist on Spotify if you search for the Wednesday Wang, and all 50 tracks are there for you to enjoy. And next week I'll talk about the last batch. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it so far, and please remember to try and come find me on YouTube at Wing Magma, on Instagram at Wing Magma. You can find this podcast on Spotify, both the standard podcast version and the radio show version, where I talk about the tracks and then you get to hear the tracks. And like I say, you can find the Wednesday Wang playlist up on Spotify too. So until next week, guys, stay safe, and I hope you enjoy the playlist, and I shall speak to you guys very, very soon. Take care.